Welcome to The Village Lantern, a podcast for families living with hidden challenges such as autism and other neurodiverse conditions, and for anyone else wanting to understand, love and support. Our mission is to build understanding, empathy and love for families living with one or more children who have hidden conditions that make life harder in one way or another. We call this extra zing.
Because what I saw was a flash. I did the catastrophizing. I flashed to the future, and I just like, the future I had in mind was gone. And you go, I know how hard it can be to be neurodivergent in the world, and now I feel awful for her. But then my psychiatrist, who I went to see, because you've got to get some help, she pointed out, you don't get the awesome kids without something else having to be a challenge. My kids literally, if they walk into a room, every single person knows they're there. They will make a mark in the world. But what comes with that is quite a lot of tiring stuff parental-wise. But you can't wish for any other children because they are super cool.
In the spirit of reconciliation, Takes a Village acknowledges the traditional custodians of country here on the lands of the Boon Wurrung and Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, as well as throughout Australia, and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Hello, friends.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi. It's great to have you both here again, and I think we feel it's time again, because we have talked about this a little bit, is parent wellbeing, mental health for parents of neurodivergent kids, because we all individually have had our own personal experiences with it, and in some ways that's the goal of starting this podcast in the first place, was to be able to really create messaging or stories for parents to share our experience, because we know that this is a shared experience, that parenting is hard.
Yeah.
It is.
And this parenting is extra.
Yeah.
And
And you're not alone.
you're not alone.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that we've learned so much about being connected and being able to talk, because you can talk to other parents. And if you have some visibility of their life and they're living a neurotypical life and they say, oh, parenting, hey, tough, isn't it? And you think,
You've got no idea.
and it's not absolutely not about judgment of anyone else's experience, but it's not relatable
Yeah.
because it's not the same.
And it's also not like, you don't want to make people feel bad
At all.
for having a different experience to yours. So you
Exactly.
usually keep quiet.
Their hard is their hard.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Our hard is our hard.
And other people have different hard. It's not a
it's
competition
true.
of hard,
Yeah.
but we want to talk about the version that we're living.
Yeah.
And you also don't want to say, if somebody does have a child that has challenges and you're further ahead than they are, like say for me, I don't want to say to Shah, although I do say it, just wait till puberty, it gets worse.
I know.
Because because it does get really bad. But also they're in the shit at the moment.
Yeah.
So you don't really, it's not always about that, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And though in some ways I get a lot of, I think comfort is the right word, from hearing about parents who are further ahead in the journey, because I am always seeking positive stories. You can find negative ones everywhere. But if I can find someone who says to me, it's going to get better, and I believe them because I've seen their story, or they've given me enough information to be able to relate, I love to hear that. I love to hear that.
Well, it's always good to be pre-warned as well, I think, because knowledge is power. And if you think,
Front load the shit show.
get ready for it.
I'm really vexed about that, because I even remember when the babies were little and before we really knew we had extra challenges, and parents of older children would say, oh, little babies, little problems, big kids, big problems. And I didn't want to hear that back then. I was like, this feels hard enough.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear about that. So I'm contradicting myself a bit, but I think there's real power in hearing someone else's story. And when they say, there's no shocked faces, there's no horror, there's just a
Yeah.
and I feel you, there's so much power in that.
I think what I've come to realise lately is that obviously we have the newborn days when it's really hard, and most people kind of move through that and they get out the other side and they say, gosh, that was hard. And, you have the baby, you go home, you fight through that kind of slightly bleak period of changing your whole life with this thing that needs you. And then they get more and more independent. You can see kind of light at the end of the tunnel. And I think for families with neurodivergent children, often maybe as they get older, it might get a bit harder. And especially in our case, the newborn no sleeping days is happening now. So my kids slept really, really well when they were babies, like 12 hours, not a peep. I was like, this is what
All
people
over it
worry
is,
about.
yeah.
You right now even hearing that, but now
I think it's all karma
relative.
because actually, I've got a 5-year-old and 10-year-old. They sleep less now than they did when they were babies. So, the kind of sleeplessness of parenthood, I'm like relating to people with newborns.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is really weird. Like,
Yeah.
and I see people who they watch box sets in the evening, or they get up and do exercise in the morning. And I'm like, I've been up for 48 hours. I'm not ready to go to the gym at 6 a.m. and start my day. It's
and I don't want to hear about it either. Because I can't,
It's just different world.
Yeah.
Does it help because I remember when and you were in this phase of it just being so difficult, and we went away together and, you really needed to exercise, but you couldn't fit it in. And I remember saying to you, one day you will be able to. Does that help you? I know, Anna, that helped you, but do you feel like...
Do you know what scares me a little bit is we all know that every autistic child is different. So you can find people similar to you, but it's going to be different, and you don't know what challenges your child's going to face.
Yeah.
And also we know day to day, we don't know how they're going to cope. You can have a great day on a day you think is going to be awful, and have an awful day on a day you think is going to be great. So sometimes I have to kind of block out what other people say because
it's your own.
I don't want to get false hope and be like, by the time they're 18, they're going to be not sleeping in our bed, sleeping through the night, not needing us to be there so much. But I've seen, I know I've heard of parents who've got kids 15 still sleeping in their bed, and people go, they won't still be sleeping in their bed when they're older. It's like, no, I know that sometimes they do, and it's not their fault. It's the child needs you. They need to co-regulate with you. You're not being a weird parent, like weird kind of, I can't let my child go, I need them.
Yeah.
It's not for you, it's for them. They cannot regulate alone.
And
they
need to sleep
you
as well, right?
And we need to sleep.
I think the thing about what you just said, Shah, and also what you said, Bel, when you come to the place where you accept that you don't know what tomorrow's going to be like, but it could be good or it could be hard.
But it'll be different.
It'll be different or not, but that letting go of trying to predict the future, good or bad. So if you hear a hopeful story, then you think, could be. So I think you can still pick up a positive response from that without it being disappointing. Because I do believe that it's important that we seek positive, hopeful sentiments.
Yeah, and I
regardless
never try
of what happens.
Yeah, and I remember, you used to talk about I don't want to think into the future about what it might look like, but I try and stop myself from doing that all the time because it can send you into that spiral. If we're talking about mental health, if I think about, hang on, will they get a job or when will they ever move out of home or whatever it might be, you can spiral quite easily.
Yeah.
So
And
also there's a catastrophizing that happens that is really, detrimental to mental health. It's so easy to just think the worst or worry about the worst from one little maybe behavior or, not being able to cope in that situation. You think, well, when they're older, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Oh my God, they're going to end up being this.
Yeah.
Can you stop yourself from doing that?
I've found it easier lately, but it's to do with radical acceptance that your child is always trying their best.
Yeah.
Always trying their best. It's not, everything they do has a reason behind it that's not linked to, being a bad person, going to end up violent as an adult, and then going to end up antisocial. Yeah. All these things that we get scared about, because actually our job as parents is to make sure we bring out kind of decent humans that don't go off and create wars and bloody,
So how did you then teach yourself to, is that through therapy?
I've had to do a lot of reading. I think when you've got PDA children especially, and PDA, pathological demand avoidance, is a kind of subset of autism, which I've talked about a bit before, but when you've got PDA children, they present in quite a way that's quite antisocial sometimes. The normal parenting techniques don't work with those kind of children, it comes across as quite rude. The kids can seem as like, why can't they just listen to their parents? And
they're disrespectful.
Yeah, they're disrespectful or they're violent. And you think, wow, how have I ended up with, violent children? You're like, this is all my fault. I must have a really dysfunctional family. And actually, when you read a lot, and I, urge people who are really sitting at home worrying about their family being dysfunctional, if you read a lot about families with PDA and you see that those children are trying their best, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to end up to be, antisocial human beings. And I've found loads of kind of adults with PDA who've got jobs, who are happy, who have managed to cope, have worked their way through the world, because the world is hard for autistic people. We know that. It's not built for them. So when you see these kind of, it's not just positive stories, it's people having lives or being able to cope or not ending up, they went through terrible years as a teenager because teenage years are really difficult and no one understands them and no one's accommodating the scaffolding around them enough to let them thrive. When you get through that necessarily on the other side and they become an adult and they can put those things in place for themselves, as long as you've given them the tools to even know how to do that, you've kind of done your job.
Yeah, and I think that is the bit about where you can say with a really honest heart that it does get easier as they get older, because if you do that work to start to unpack what is going on for them, and you do it with experts and you read and you get to understand, because as like all parenting, as you get to understand your child, you can help them with the bits that they need help with. You can give them freedom for the bits that they need freedom with. And then, of course, when they get out of school and they have more ability to manage the lives around them, there's all of that. But I think that is the bit where, yes, that you can be guaranteed that things are going to change and you don't know if you're going to have the same problems or different problems. But what you do know you can have is more information. And I feel like I'm at a place now with my 13-year-old where I have so much more understanding of her needs, of how to communicate that. And I think we talked about it last time, getting reports, OT reports, speech reports, psychology, that also serve to communicate with others, schools and other therapists, whatever. And whenever I've presented reports like that to someone who's seeking to help her, they're so grateful because it sets them up. So I think in that sense, you can look ahead knowing that things will be easier in some way if you are able to do that work to deeply understand your kids.
I think that's the thing, because we talk about mental health and we talk about, because we're tired or because there's extra work involved, so there's a bit more load. You have to be, driving them to appointments. You have to have so much in your brain. But I would say that the thing that I really struggle with, I don't know about you guys, but is not when you first get on this journey, you're like, I can't connect with my child. I just assume that I'd have a baby. We'd be like bestie friends. We'd grow up and together and I'd love them and they would love me back and I'd get them. And that's not necessarily the case when you've got kids whose brains are wired different to yours. So you have to, first of all, get to know them. And second, you have to connect. And once you connect, you feel so much better about your situation because, they talk about connect, don't correct. Because if you're spending your life correcting your child, it's going to be a pretty miserable household. Yeah. But if you're spending your time trying to connect, I know it's all words, isn't it? It's easy to do. We say it, but it's like, how do you do it? But once you've connected, my mental health changed because there was a time when I just wanted to get behind their eyes and just go, how do you see this?
Yeah.
How is this for you? And once you start to see, now I can look over at my 10-year-old and something will happen and I'll look to him. This has been my dream. And he'll look over to me and we look at each other and he knows I get it.
Yes.
And he feels safe because I go, I know that's stressful. Don't worry, I'm here.
Yes.
And it's an unsaid thing. And my mental health just goes like,
Yes.
Because actually that's, I think, maybe I don't know if it's a mum thing, but not being able to have that connection with your child, it's really very hard on your psyche.
Yeah.
I mean, dads must get it too, but I don't know if I birthed something. I want that.
But I think there's a bit that we're missing though in this story, which certainly Anna and I have talked about, is the bit before you realise you need to connect, which is the grief part.
Yeah.
So before you realise that connection and the deep dive into their brains and really understanding that.
Acceptance first.
Yeah, it's acceptance. It's acceptance that, my child, my parenthood and me raising my child is going to look different. And that sent both Anna and I into a spiral because you you know, the first sort of bump in my mental health journey was definitely when I had my second child, and then the obstetrician said, well, you've got perinatal depression. Is that the one before you have the baby?
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Perinatal.
Because of the firstborn. And I didn't really, because I was so anxious about having another child that was going to be just as difficult as the first one, that sent my mental health spiraling, that I didn't know actually that could happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So there's all a bit, and then that child gets older and you struggling with connection with that one, you know what I mean? And then you're like, this is not what I thought it was going to be like.
Yes.
I just remember that mantra, this is not what I thought it would be like, because you've got that fixed mindset of your own vision, and then accepting that.
And I think that grief, I think you can't get to acceptance unless you let the grief process.
Yeah.
You know, like that's certainly my experience. And as I think I've done a bit of reading on grief, and grief is not like a rounded out process that ends. It keeps going. But I think that the grief is complex.
Yeah.
Because you said it wasn't what you expected. I don't think I had a vision of what I expected.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I've had trouble coming to terms with the concept of grief, because I've been talking about it with my psychologist for a long time, and she would often say, oh, that's grief. It's not what you expected. And I kind of get stuck on that, because I'm like, but I didn't have a vision of what I expected. So how is that? But one, of course you do, because you have your own childhood. So that's number one. You've got some version of expectation because of how your own childhood was. But also I think the other bit about grief is the sorrow that you can't fix it. Or maybe that's for me. That's very personal, because I am a fixer, and I've had pretty good success about if I work really hard and try really hard and read enough and research enough and ask enough people, I can work it out. And I think that's taken me a long time to accept that, one, I can't fix it, and two, what does working it out mean? It's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
So you don't get there.
I think that's the thing that a lot of people, they get the diagnosis and they're like, right, what do we need to do to make this better? And you know, I certainly had that because, you know, my 10-year-old had a heart condition when he was born. We had to fix it. We had to get the best cardiologist, get him sorted. It was, you know,
medical problem.
People who know more than me about this kind of thing can fix him.
Yeah.
And he got fixed. And then 6 months later, he got diagnosed as autistic. Well, maybe a year or so later.
Where's the expert?
And I was like, so who do we get for this now?
Next,
And, you know, it took me a long time to realise we don't need to fix him.
Yes.
We need to fix the world.
Yes.
But also I think this is why these conversations are so important. We need to see what normal parenthood is in our world more often, so that we have expectations that are different. Because I think we don't see it enough. All the baby books don't talk about it enough. You know, we get panicked if our kid isn't meeting a milestone. We're like, oh my God, you know, because it's sort of delivered as a kind of negative all the time.
Yeah, that often is the beginning, isn't it? It starts with baby milestones. I mean, different for everyone, but certainly did for us. And you find yourself at each time when they're like, or the mental health, or the maternal health nurses, there's a few crosses on the thing, and then you get a report from the childcare centre, a few question marks, crosses, red marks, and you don't know what any of that is. And I think for me, I do tend to have a bit of an optimistic outlook, and I'm like, oh, well, that doesn't mean anything, you know, that, and it doesn't, there's not a right or wrong way, but when each of those milestones, and I think when you were saying before, Bel, it does get harder as they get older. You said that, Char, because the gap between them and their peers widens and widens.
Yeah, and I think I've had a lot of friends lately that's, you know, children may have been diagnosed a bit later, meaning in primary school, not before primary school. And it's that gap when it starts to widen, and you know as a parent there's something not quite right, but you're not necessarily, they're still meeting mainly if you're born female, that you're meeting the milestones, you're masking, you're doing tick, 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 but you're like, hang on a second. And I keep saying to them, keep going back. Every year, go back to the psychologist. Get another review, because you know
my 5-year-old met all the milestones. Everything until we hit kinder, which is 4 years old. I mean, honestly, her charts were like 90% centile for everything, just brilliant.
Just nailing it.
Just nailing life. And
except for sleeping.
And then, you know, sleeping was quite a recent thing. But then you get the kinder teacher going, I just need to discuss there's delays in social and emotional and a couple of other things. I was like, what? And then, you know, I was like, I can't deal with this now, because I was, you know, going through a lot with my son.
But how good are kinder teachers though?
I know, so good. And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, she doesn't play with the other kids. In fact, she controls the other kids. She's the only kid that's come in and clapped her hands and made all the kids do what she wants to do that day. She said, we've never had a child do that.
We found my 15-year-old's prep transition thing the other day, and we were both reading it together, my 15-year-old and I, and we were laughing so hard because, like exactly what you're saying, they were like, this child has got some great leadership, shows great leadership potential, but they should learn to take on the other roles, i.e. follower. You know what I mean? And then it was like sharer and whatever. And I was like, we were just laughing going, oh my God, this is classic, isn't it?
But that's the beautiful bit, right? To get to the point when you can laugh about it. And because back to mental health, that's when the mental health starts just crumbling a little bit. Is every time a teacher comes in and says, I want to talk to you, every time you see your child with a peer group and you can see it, and it just builds, doesn't it? It just slow, fear, panic.
I'm laughing about it now too, but I was devastated. I was like, I just don't need this. I just don't need this.
The second time around again, it's a different experience.
I was just like, are you kidding?
Yeah.
What? And then I was like, oh, it's probably just moving. We're in a whole new country. You know, it's got to be something to do with that. And then when you start the process and you're like, oh no.
There it is.
But how did you not kind of crumble at that point? And I'm not trying to be dramatic, but I'm genuinely, because we're talking about mental health, interested in what did you draw on? What are the things that helped you? You know, was it?
It was really hard. I have to say, I had to give up my whole life just to focus on making sure that, I mean, that's the way I deal with things, making sure that I could give 100% to the situation. If I was working as hard as I was working before and I needed to deal with this, I would have just exploded and collapsed. I don't know how I would have done it. I had to have big cries, just massive. I got a psychiatrist.
Did you look in the mirror and cry? I love those ones.
Oh, no, I didn't do a dramatic, it was more like, I was more angry and just like, why us? Like, because what I saw was a flash. I did the catastrophizing. I flashed to the future and I just like, the future I had in mind was gone. And you go, I know how hard it can be to be neurodivergent in the world. And now I feel awful for her. And I actually had a moment where I was like, maybe we shouldn't have had kids together. Like, what's going on with her, like, genetic makeup? But then my psychiatrist, who I went to see, because you've got to get some help, she... Number one, she pointed out, and I actually kind of brought this up as well, you don't get the awesome kids without something else having to be a challenge. And my kids literally, if they walk into a room, every single person knows they're there. By the end of it, they've introduced themselves to everybody. Yeah. They've talked about their interests. They will make a mark in the world.
Yes.
But what comes with that is quite a lot of tiring stuff parental-wise. But you can't, I can't wish for any other children because they are super cool and lovely.
Gosh.
And, I'm sure one day they're going to be, all of this is going to be channeled into something that I don't want them to be extraordinary at all because who wants that? I just want them to be happy, but, interesting, rounded people who've got interesting thoughts in their head that they want to share with the world and the world's listening. Yeah. Because I think for their mental health, the world's not listening to you. It's awful.
Yeah. I think, so psychiatrist, I think
medication.
Well, one of the things that I have always been quite passionate about when I worked it out, because it took some time, was you've got to start with a good GP. You've got to start with a good GP. And where we got to is that we have a family GP who sees all the kids. And even my husband and I now, we all go to the same GP. And the benefit of that is when you go in, they know your history, they know your kids. So when you're trying to tell them an update or where things are up to, that's really important because they can even say to you, oh, that would have been hard because, 10-year-old was whatever then. So I think number one, get a really good GP, not the ones where bulk billing, go in, get your antibiotics and leave, not that.
And they're the ones that can say as well, like I remember my GP saying to me, I was like, I could go down on my SSRIs, and the GP was like, you've just had a third child be diagnosed as neurodivergent. Yes. It's not the time
and my
now.
GP
and I was like, oh my God, it's not the time now.
Same.
Whereas if I'd seen a random person, they would have been like, okay, fine, or whatever.
Yeah, no,
so
that's a
she
really
was
good.
I'm just flagging this with you. I think that's
well,
brilliant.
they know you, and I feel sad because you'd never get this service in England, but the GP here was so good. She booked in every 2 weeks for me to go in and see her. She's like, we are going to get you strong again, because I was just in a mess. I was like, I explained the situation. We've just arrived, we've traveled across the world. I've changed our whole lives. My husband's dad's just died. My kids my eldest is going through autistic burnout and is dropped out of school, and my youngest is just about to be diagnosed. And she's like, whoa. And I said, before that, there was a heart condition to deal with and 6 miscarriages. And she was like,
she's like, I'm going to set up a bed for you here in my office.
So you can
but sometimes you need an expert to say.
Yes.
GP, then they can refer you to a psychologist. They can give you medication for like some condition, some things. And then they can also refer you to a psychiatrist and a pediatrician for your child. So,
and you can get a mental health care plan.
Mental health plan.
Because that's a new thing you get here, which we don't get in England. But just to explain to English listeners, it's a kind of thing where if your GP says you've got a mental health plan, when you kind of go through spending on anything to do with your mental health, you get more rebate. Is that
Psychologist.
right?
So it has to be a clinical...
Psychiatry?
No, Medicare. Okay. But so the doctor will do a survey with you, and they'll assess your anxiety and depression, and then they'll write a letter, and you can take that letter to your psychologist, and your psychologist will charge most of the fee to Medicare, which is our health system, and then you pay a small difference. And that's
and
for 10
children
sessions.
As well. So
everyone's
our
entitled
children
to
and
it.
ourselves.
Okay, it's great. I mean,
during COVID, we got 20.
Yes.
Wow.
Which was amazing.
Really good.
Yeah.
So GP, and I think the other thing is being really honest. When you go in there.
Don't go in there and pretend. Don't do that whole, I'm fine, I'm just being a mum, and mum, it's being hard, isn't it? And
because
you just got to get it out.
Yeah.
And then you can get some help. Yeah.
And sometimes it takes a bit even for you to realise that, to actually realise
Say it out loud.
Maybe I am
you had
struggling.
to do my intervention, remember?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't realise I was doing an intervention at the time.
Yeah.
What happened?
I think Bel and I have been talking a lot over the time, and I'm a little bit ahead. Sort of. Not really. Maybe because it was a bit more severe for us. I don't know. We got a bit bumpy earlier, but I think I just did say something.
We went away together. It was a separate away together. Yeah, and then we were sharing, and then I said, sometimes when I'm driving the car, I just get so angry. I just want to smash it into a tree or something. And you were like, that's not normal. Like not in a rude way, you shouldn't feel like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I was like, oh God, this was probably like 6 years ago or something.
Yeah, but you had some reservations about medication, I remember.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I think, and of course, like with anyone, it's very personal, and you have to, it's your choice, but I think it took you to get to quite a severe place before you were open to it, and now you're like, I'm never going off them.
No, never. And also neither are my children. Well, just because then it became, that was before really things got super challenging, like before puberty, you know, with my eldest and before the other 2 got diagnosed. So I think that then allowed me to cope with it really well. And I think that you've got to brace yourself for those moments. It's like, the perimenopause kind of thing. It's like get in there. And that's the other thing is what my GP said is being on medication as you launch into a perimenopause is really, really important.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
did you not know that?
Yeah, it's been amazing for my PMT and the peri coming.
Yeah,
I mean, it's weird because I was just driving down the street and I would just cry. And I would just walk into a cafe and just cry. Or I'd be standing I'd see little children going into school and I'd just cry because my child wasn't going into school. And I'd cry everything. And I was like, what's happening? And I was like, this is weird. This is kind of getting in the way of my day.
Yeah.
I haven't got time to cry. And I'm not saying, obviously since I've been on the medication, I don't cry anymore, but which is not a good thing necessarily.
No.
But
it's hard to cry,
I can literally
I cry all the time.
cope now. But I can cope now, whereas before I was just crying all the time, which wasn't helping me.
No. And also the whole thing about, I was thinking about bracing yourself, but you then were able to, you had reserves when it came time to the 5-year-old's diagnosis because you weren't in that phase. You built up some strength.
Yes, I was ready.
You were
more
ready.
I mean, if I'd just been left,
because we have
who knows what would have happened. I
we
mean,
have to
and
be
the crying
so strong.
isn't just because I was sad about the situation. I think it was just years of
grief.
tiredness of it all.
And you don't see it, I think. At least, again, everyone's got a different experience. But that's why this is important, I think, for us to talk about is that you might not even see it in yourself.
No,
and
you don't see
sometimes when people say to you, oh, are you okay?
Yeah.
And you're like, yes, I'm fine. What do you mean? It's like, because there is a little bit of that, I don't have time to not be okay.
Yeah. I remember at Gwingana when they told me to breathe and I wanted to hit them.
Oh, yeah.
Because they were like, now, you just really, really wound up. You just need to breathe. And I was like, fucking couldn't tell me to breathe.
It's like when
now I look back and I'm like, oh my God, I was so offended by someone telling me to breathe.
But it's making me want to breathe right now.
We all breathe.
But I was so wound up, you know.
And that's right. So it's not easy to see that you're there.
Yeah.
Because also, and I think it's better for women, thankfully, it is hard to say, I'm struggling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then because then you're like, well, so what? And then who cares?
What?
Like no one actually cares.
No.
So what does it matter?
Job. You still got to.
But we care, and that's the other thing. So we said GP potentially, you know, in discussions with them and psychologists, therapy, but connection with other people who are sharing your life.
Yeah.
Because what we can do is say, I know, and I feel you, and you need to get help. And you can hear it from someone who you know understands you, I think.
Yeah.
Or, you know, it's going to get better, it's going to change or whatever, or that's terrible, I know where you're at. And that, I think, if you combine your sort of medical support with allied support of, you know, therapists and other things, and then connection, that might sound easier than it is. In one way, hopefully we're creating a little bit of that. But we are everywhere. Yeah. Remember, like in The Witches? Remember that book, Roald Dahl, The Witches? And they were everywhere.
Yeah.
But we're everywhere, but we are hiding.
God,
so true.
But we're hiding.
We're
not hiding on purpose. We're hiding because we're in self-protection. But if you can find a way to connect with people in your sort of local area, being able to get together on a weekend afternoon, and the idea of them bringing their kids over or you going there or meeting somewhere is not a horrendous idea because you know that whatever their kids do, you're not going to blink. And whatever your kids do, they're not going to blink. Or if they do, you'll laugh or cry.
What I love as well, what's happened to us lately, because obviously I'm starting a whole new life here, people are getting in touch going, oh, my sister-in-law's just moved here. They've got an autistic 11-year-old. I think you guys will get on. You've got the same humour. The kids will probably get on. I mean, who knows if the kids are getting on?
You never know. That's
and
not
in a way,
just do side-by-side play.
Side-by-side play or different room play.
Or just
fine. Or maybe just
headphones.
But it's not about the kids. In this moment, it's about the parents, right?
Exactly. And they're looking for connection. You're looking for connection. And often you're like, I'm too tired to do anything anyway. But they get it.
Yes.
And I think often what Sonny and I do is we go to like a social event and we look at each other and we say, he often says to me, please don't talk about how hard it is at the moment with these people because we can...
we can pretend to be normal.
I'm so desperate to connect and to sort of share how hard it's been. Because you walk into a party or whatever, not that we go to many, but we walk in and I'm like...
I love the idea that you go to a party.
I don't know, in my mind we go to a party. I'm
Can we have a party, just the three of us?
Maybe just
a pizza night. Just a small pizza night. But I walk in and I think no one knows the absolute hell that this week has been. And I feel I need to tell them because I'm just that kind of person. I'm like, I can't just put on a facade.
Tell them because otherwise it's fake.
But then sometimes I could spend the whole night just talking about it and you're reliving it. And he said, sometimes it's too much. And I said, but actually that's how the connections go.
Yeah, but connecting with people like-minded people.
Yeah,
I think that's the thing. And
the energy expulsion of telling them people who don't get it is actually quite tiring.
And then you have to face their reaction in their faces.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the horror or the shock or the kind of they don't know what to say. But I think
there's one person of all the people you just shared it with that goes, and then you found a new connection.
Yeah. And you feel like you know each other, don't you?
Yeah, it's so weird.
You feel like you know each other so much more deeply than any other stranger that you've met because you share so much in common. And that's really powerful for feeling safe and understood and really important for mental health.
Amazing woman in my park quite a lot on podcasts, but there's this lovely woman in the park and we met because the husbands were walking the dogs and we've both got the same dog and Sonny started talking and saying, we've got this 10-year-old, he doesn't go to school, he's autistic. And the dad went, I've got a 10-year-old, he doesn't go to school, he's autistic. And he's like, I'm going to get my wife, because guys are terrible at kind of communicating. I'm going to get my wife. I'll text your wife, get your wife, they can chat because that's what women do, right? We're like, we need to connect. And guys are a bit crap at it, which is a shame because I think they really need to. That's so important in their own way. So we texted, met in the park and literally like we're chalk and cheese, but we see each other. We like, the other day I told her that she said, how's the sleep? I said, well, we'd messed up the medication dosage and we didn't realise. And so the 5-year-old's sleep had regressed. And then when we realised, we're like, we've been underdosing. put the dose up and she slept. And this friend just burst into tears. And I said, what have I done? I'm so sorry. She went, I just can't believe it
so
for you. I'm so happy you're finally getting sleep, but also can't believe that you did the dosage wrong. And how unfair. And
I've met her too in the park. She is, but
amazing.
That's the beauty, isn't it? And so I think that's, of course, when you're people like us who are very oversharers, like I meet people everywhere, and so I'm not saying that doesn't work for everyone, because not everyone can do that. But even if you start on a chat group, on a Facebook chat or something, or we've got a little Mighty Networks platform that's just growing, but that's the purpose of that, is to be able to say things, get responses back that are encouraging, understood.
Well, through her, I found out about the medications to ask for.
Yes.
I found out about support workers. I found out so much stuff, and we share resources. We've gone through ups and downs at different times.
Yes.
So there's been times where I've been rock bottom, and we just text park ? And we meet, and one of others will bring a coffee, and it's like, ugh.
Yeah.
And other times the other ones needs the and it's
so
just
good.
amazing,
So there's another little pocket of mental health. And I think the other thing is, and I know we don't like to hear this, but we do need a break.
Yeah.
And so babysitter, or if you're lucky enough to have, well, I guess it's hard because it's a little bit like go and do yoga.
Oh,
yeah.
And
for sure. It's like, go and get a break. You're like, no one's sleeping. How do I?
But the way that the first thing required in order to get a break is that you have some kind of help. And so, it might be a babysitter.
And that's difficult because you can't get a regular babysitter often. And, at the moment, I'm not able to leave the kids with anyone who's sort of untrained in that sense. I mean, they're fine, but night times are the worst time for them, and they get highly anxious, and I'll get a lot of phone calls.
But you don't go at night time. Like, you work out when...
We try and do breakfast.
Yeah, and it gets easier as the child gets used to it. And I'm not simplifying it as a simple thing at all, but there is a lot more, at least in Australia, opportunity to access support workers who have got some experience and training.
The support worker thing here, I have to say, has changed our lives. If I just... every time... NDIS is paying for support workers to help my children to live independent lives. And it has honestly changed our life.
Yeah.
And I when all these good things happen here, I get so sad that we can't have that in England. And I can see people just desperate going, who can help us? Like, how do we get my child to school when I've also got to do this? Or how do I, even go to a therapy session with my child when I've got another child at home? Like, how do we do this? And here, I mean, we've got amazing funding for support workers, and I've got the most amazing support worker at the moment, who I got off you. Anna.
I love her too. But
she's just amazing.
So again, like all our topics, we could talk on and on, but we really want to try and limit the time so that they're kind of digestible chunks.
Yeah.
But have we missed anything? So we started off talking about mental health, that we sort of talked about how having a GP at the centre, considering therapy or counselling, having a connection into people who understand you, and then having some form of a break so you can go and breathe in the park or go for a walk or go to the shops by yourself, whatever it is. Those things, it's almost about trying to keep those maybe in different weightings across time, but to have all of those things in your toolkit.
Yeah. And exercise, but I know that's not always possible for people who've got, if their children have got school can't, but that's critical.
And fresh air. Fresh air. Yeah.
I mean, I just get in the water and
scream. You're crazy.
I mean, that's not real exercise though.
That's amazing, that cold water situation.
But that's a 10-minute out of my day. So in a way, that's how I fit it in.
Yeah.
But going into cold water screaming, getting out, feeling alive, getting my whole body moving, and I'm like, well, that took 10 minutes.
And actually
it sets you up.
Yeah. So let's just also say though that it's so hard.
I
think it's so real.
And I suppose that's another thing I wanted to say, is that you don't have to have a full kind of the breakdown moment, but if you find yourself bursting into tears, or you find yourself dreading every little teacher, instructor, carer, babysitter contacting you and wanting to give you feedback about your child, then you're not alone, and it's really hard.
And go to the GP.
You go to the GP because it wears you down.
I wonder if we could put some resources. I don't know.
What we can. We show notes on the Takes a Village website.
Okay, let's do that because I mean, and also this is another thing to add. And there's a section of the autism community who'd be saying like, how dare you say that your life is hard with an autistic child? Because why should it be so hard for you? Like, being autistic isn't hard. And we would say, well, we're talking from our experiences of our personal lived experiences of being parents to autistic or neurodivergent children.
Yeah.
And I totally get that.
My 15-year-old says, please don't go on a podcast and talk about how hard your life is because of me. And I said, we don't do that. We talk about how we can support other people.
I think it's important to mention that because no one wants to think that their parents are getting on a podcast moaning about how hard it is to bring up their...
No, we're talking about our this episode particularly was our mental health. It wasn't our children's mental health.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that, Char. That's great. Okay. That's important, and we're going to keep trying to do that. We're trying to keep an overlay of we're only speaking on our own behalves, and I hope it comes across that we are so well-intentioned.
Yeah.
And if we do get things wrong or say things that are offensive or that perhaps could be said in a different way, let us know. You can contact us on Instagram or there's an email address on the website. We want to hear. But really, I hope we can convey that we are coming from a place of love and compassion and care and connection.
Thanks,
Thank you, ladies.
Thanks.
Thanks for the conversation. Bye.